Once upon a time, some good-hearted folks with a desire to work even harder than they already were decided to get together and create an organization called NAVA, which stands for No Artificial Voices Allowed. Okay, not quite. It actually stands for National Association of Voice Actors, but I know now they're thinking about renaming it. Now, part of NAVA's mission is to speak on behalf of voice actors everywhere, to make sure we're getting treated fairly as the rise of artificial intelligence and synthetic voices gains momentum. My guests today, who have both been on the show previously in other capacities, are the NAVA founder and president and co-founder and vice president. Welcome back to the show, Tim Friedlander and Carin Gilfry.
Hello, hello.
Yay, hello.
No artificial voices allowed.
That's a new one.
I feel
like
like at the very least, there's some merch in there.
Right.
So
How much do
AI,
you want? 10%, 20%,
yeah,
50%?
you know what? You take
know.
the money, put it in the Brad Fund. We're good to go. But I
Cool.
think there's an opportunity there. So AI, are you tired of talking about it yet?
Not
Never.
at all. No.
Never. We talk about it all day, every
Yes.
day.
I was going to
as
say
much
you
as
are
possible.
so well versed in it at this point. You could probably do this with your eyes closed and your hands tied behind your back. But there's a lot to cover.
Yes.
And I will be the first to admit that I am relatively clueless about a lot of this stuff. And so that's why I'm really looking forward to getting some clear answers from you guys. So let's start with, Tim, we're going to start with you. And
Sure.
we've done an interview before that
Mhm.
talked about NAVA. So I don't want to
Yeah.
deep dive into what NAVA is,
Yeah.
because we'll refer back to that interview.
Yeah.
But for those that are maybe not familiar, this is their first time hearing it before they get a chance to go back and listen to that interview. Just give us kind of the general overview of the who, what, and why of NAVA.
Yeah, NAVA grew out of the kind of the community groups that Carin and I had both been running for years. She had Voice Actors in NYC. I had Gardner Street and Gardner Collective and various other things in LA. And we just wanted to take that. I think both of us saw all of these same questions always getting asked in all the different groups and all the different places. And basically we're spending a lot of our time answering the same questions in that group over here and this group over here and people coming. And so so many people not having a single place to go to find some really what we believe to be accurate information or some helpful information. And so we decided to put together this group this association that would be able to provide a larger platform for that. And then specifically to be able to offer access to national healthcare. And that was kind of the impetus for all this in the first place, which we launched with in November of 2022, and then immediately jumped into the AI discussion right after that.
Started out with this noble goal of healthcare, which you thought like, oh, we could tackle that, no problem.
Yep.
And then somebody just dropped the AI bomb on you.
Yep, exactly. And all of a sudden, healthcare wasn't a big deal. We're like,
Yeah.
getting healthcare, that's easy now.
Healthcare's done.
Yeah.
Healthcare's a
We don't need that
We
if the
solved
robots
it.
take over.
We
So
Right.
solved it. No.
all right, so let's start with the recent SAG After Deal. So for a while, it felt like everybody in Hollywood was on strike and there was never going to be a new season of television ever again. But SAG ultimately came to terms with the deal with the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. One of the points that I know was big in the strike was regulating artificial intelligence usage. So either one of you, both of you, let's talk about the end result of that particular deal and how that specifically impacts voice actors.
That's a great question. I think, one of the things about this, the specifically the TV theatrical strike, is that so much of the voiceover industry doesn't work under that contract. So a lot of what was in that discussion and what was being discussed and what came out of that doesn't necessarily impact voice actors. And this was mentioned last night Zeke Alton mentioned this last night. There's over 600 SAG After contracts that exist. And right now, there is one contract that has references to AI protections or language or anything in it.
So you get your work cut out for you then.
Yeah, exactly.
599 to go.
Exactly. So I think that regardless of the content of this, it's very difficult because so much of what is in that contract specifically addresses, and when I say that contract, the TV theatrical contract that was negotiated, addresses image and scans and movement and things that are going to affect on-camera actors, but not necessarily affect voice actors. Now, replicas, digital replicas, will affect voice actors, and anything that has, I think, on a general scope, anything that holds companies accountable to AI with some kind of regulations is good, because we can then at least build from there and make it better. There's a lot of people who are very upset with this. It did not, people. There is a call for a prohibition on AI completely. That is something that SAG After has not ever taken a stance on to try and do, and something that NAVA, even from the very beginning, we came to this. It was more of a discovery or a realization that prohibition. We're 10 years too late to this discussion about trying to prohibit
I think there's a
AI.
slim to none
Absolutely.
chance of that ever happening in any capacity with regards to AI, not just related specifically to voiceover entertainment, just period. I think, that ship sailed. Yeah.
I think also, technology will move forward. AI will go on with or without the participation of actors.
Yes.
So anything that we can do to have more protections in place is good. Union protections are some of the best, because SAG-AFTRA has tons of resources, tons of lawyers. They will, stand by their members and defend their contracts and go to bat for actors who are affected by this. If you're non-union, you might have the protections of the legal system. You might have protections of a lawyer that you pay, but it's not the same as having union protections. So anytime the union can offer a little bit of an umbrella for you to stand under is a good thing. So yeah.
I want to expand on that a little bit, though, because I think one of the points is, you mentioned, okay, on the non-union side, you could get a lawyer, but how much does that matter at this point? Because the whole system is so new, and there's not really a lot of rules and regulations around it yet. So can a lawyer even protect you at this point? Because we're not even sure what we're being protected from. That's still being figured out, right?
Yeah, a lot of this stuff is completely untested. So even just the idea that your voice print is protected biometric data is not widely adopted in every single state federally, in the United States. So, and your voice print can be used as biometric data. Anyone who's ever called their bank and used "my voice is my password," now that I said that, everyone who listens to this podcast can access my bank accounts, knows that you can, use voice print as biometric data. When your mom calls you from an unknown number and says, "Hi, honey," in 2 words who it is, who's called you, without ever looking at the caller ID, because your mother's voice print is so deeply burned into your brain, you can recognize it. So having that be protected is very, very important to us. And that's what we've been going to DC and talking about with lawmakers. There are a bunch of bills that are in draft and coming before the Congress, and we're in support of those, and we're helping to write them if we can, and doing our best at, because there just aren't any laws yet.
Let's talk about that, because on one hand, I feel like it's us against big tech. And honestly, when it comes to influence in DC or, money talks, and big tech has literally all the money. What kind of things? I know you spent some time in DC, so talk about some of the things that you guys have been doing, some of the conversations that you've been having, because I know that was a big thing after MAVO. You were off to DC for some meetings, so expand on that.
That is a good question. I think the more that we have discussed this, and I've said this, I said this a few times, and I think, Carin and Matthew, who joined us, or all the 3 of us who went to DC, the more we've had this discussion, the more hope I have.
Good.
And the better I feel about a lot of things. I think one of the things that is possibly an unexpected outcome of this is an elevation of respect for artists in general that we haven't seen before. An understanding that just because you're an artist or an actor or a musician doesn't mean that you're living in Hollywood and making a ton of money and going on tour and doing all this stuff. There's this working class, blue collar, artist community that is the majority of artists, right? The majority of voice actors, the majority of on camera, the majority of musicians are not out there. If you're making a living, if you're lucky, you're making a living doing your art.
Mhm.
But I think that this has exposed the reality of what it is to be an artist in any capacity, but especially in the United States, in an area where it's very, very hard to make a living. You don't have government grants to be an artist. You don't have you don't have like the state or somebody stepping up and providing minimum working wages for an artist if you want to go in, which they have in some countries. You want to be a painter in a certain country, you can make a base living as a painter or a musician or some other artist in some of those countries, which we don't have in the United States. And I think what we've seen overall, and Carin, I think you had the same reaction, was that people are very receptive to what we have to say, and they're saying, yes, we hear the concern, we understand, it makes sense to us. Big question is, what is the solution? What's the answer? What should we do? And what's great is that I think every single person we spoke with said, I understand. So what would you like us to do? As opposed to, great, that sounds great, we'll go back and discuss it. They literally are asking us what to do because they want to know our feedback.
That's no pressure.
There's no pressure. Well, it's really interesting. I think the first time we got asked that, all three of us kind of went, that is a good question.
I was counting on you to have the answer to that. You're not supposed to. I just wanted to raise the issue.
Yeah.
We just want to support what you already said that you want to do, right?
Yeah.
No.
So, which is kind of nice, because then we get to kind of talk about, just because something is legal, is it ethical? Just because something is the way it has been forever, is that the way that it should be going forward? Does this new technology mean we have to change a lot of the ways that we legally think about transfer of rights, or we think about artists' creations, or we think about our voice, the sound of our voice, which I think a lot of people didn't really think about how delicate and how open to misuse the sound of your voice could be.
Right. So you've had conversations with people in DC, then lawmakers, or people who are potentially going to be making these laws.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts as far as, are you seeing progress then? Like, to me, I feel like if you, I don't know, maybe the States is a little different, but Canada, somebody comes up with an idea for a really great law, and 10 years later, you're still working on the 327th, version draft of something that's never actually ever going to get passed. Yeah. You said you feel optimistic people were listening. Do you feel optimistic that is something happening? Is something going to happen?
I think there are a lot of things happening. There are a lot of different bills that are coming out. There might be too many, even.
Yeah,
shocking.
Some of them need to be combined and distilled into just a few. But yeah, I'm very optimistic. Also, Tim keeps talking about this in all of our meetings, but this is an election year in the United States, and the potential for deep fakes and misuse of people's voices, specifically candidates, is very, very real. And so I think the lawmakers want to pass things quickly so that it becomes illegal for people to do that kind of thing. One thing that we are very interested in, that I think all the lawmakers are also very interested in, is a federal right of publicity. So right now, in California, in New York, in Illinois, there are some protections about your voice, likeness, and image. But that's not true federally.
Okay.
Right now, you do not really own the rights to your voice. You don't really own the rights to your
even listening
image.
To you say that, I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? Like, really? That's
you don't really. If you're a celebrity, if you're a recognizable voice or likeness, you have more protections than people who are not recognizable. But we voice actors fall into this kind of gray area, because honestly, when people see someone like Scarlett Johansson, they recognize her immediately and she's a celebrity, but people are probably interacting with me and my voice more times in one day than they ever do with Scarlett Johansson because of the things that I'm involved in, and people are hearing my voice all the time, but they don't recognize me necessarily. So does that make me a recognizable person if the general public doesn't recognize me? It's a gray area.
Right.
So, a federal right of publicity for all people would make it so that you own the rights to your voice, likeness, and image. So if somebody scrapes your voice from an Instagram video and wants to use it on a commercial, they would not be able to do that legally without your explicit consent. So that's part of what we want, and what I think the government is moving forward on quickly.
That would be amazing. The other question, though, becomes how do you know, right? Like, I'm sure you guys have been there. I've been in a situation where my voice was used in something in a way that it wasn't supposed to be used. And the only reason I found out is because somebody else heard it and was like, oh, that's Marc. I'm going to ask him about it. And they asked me about it. I'm like, what are you talking about? Right? Like, I had no idea. How do you? So it's one thing to have the protections. Then we got to figure out how do we, I don't know, police it or monitor it.
Absolutely. And that's the next step. And that's kind of a parallel thing that I've been working on with a different company to trace, track, and monitor the usage of your voice. And if you've seen, we've done a very small rollout. We're in beta testing. We've seen it in the Gardner Street group. It's the lockbox thing that we've been working on to try and for this exact reason, because you currently can't trace, track, or monitor anything. Yep. But anything that is digital is traceable. So we just, as voice actors, need to figure out how to take control of that tracing and tracking so that we can monitor that. Because we have one of the things, in addition to right of publicity, is making voice, image, name, and likeness a property right. That the voice is your property and that you can own that. And in that case, then we would have a right to track and trace our property, the usage of our property, where something goes. So we would be able to do that. The technology doesn't exist. It doesn't. I mean, or it doesn't exist in a way that we as voice actors have access to it, and that's what we're trying to change. But right. How do we monitor something? So if we could monitor our own usage, imagine if our agents had the ability to self-monitor the usage of their talent.
Right.
So how much something gets aired. That's not impossible. Spotify does this. All of the platforms do this. They can track the usage. They know exactly how many ads have been played. Advertisers know. They don't go into, they don't go to Spotify or to Apple Music or to Google Play or any of these places and just say, great, we trust that my ad aired 10 million times last month. They want to know exactly where it aired. They know exactly where that spot aired, who listened to it, demographics of who listened to it, how long somebody listened. So we, as voice actors, if our voices are in those spots, are in those things that are digitally tracked, we do have the ability, we should have the ability, but we do if the technology gets in place to trace, track, and monitor that usage. But that's the next step. And that is so much of what this has been asking for is a third party to not to let each of these companies self-regulate, but to have a third party that will be the basically the verification, certification, and tracking of the usage of AI.
We're living in the Wild West, man.
This is crazy. One of the other crazy things about AI, generative AI specifically, is that, something can be created once and never played again.
Right.
So when your voice is on an ad, the ad is a product and it airs again and again and again. And someone can hear it and go, oh, is this your voice? And then you look it up and you're like, oh my gosh, it is my voice. Yep. But if something is made with generative AI, you can literally make it one time. It says that phrase one time in a video game or on the phone or in an ad that is just passing through your Facebook feed or whatever. And then it's gone and no one can ever find it again. No one knows where it came from. You think you heard it, but was it a dream? Yeah, you don't know, Right. So it's extremely difficult to figure out because of just the nature of it not being, a solid work product. It's something that can just be one time and gone.
Tell you, I literally think like, I've watched the documentaries of them settling west and just the world that existed, and because they were starting from nothing, right? And it really does feel like we're starting from nothing. We're trying to figure, and it's not just voiceover, right? It's everybody's trying to figure this out, from the tech companies that are creating it to the industries that are impacted by it to the government that is going to be responsible for regulating it. Everybody is trying to figure this out.
To the consumers who are using it.
Yep.
Right.
I think the election thing is going to be huge, though. I mean, I've already said that. How many things have you come across on the internet, whatever social media platform, that you immediately are suspicious of? right?
Oh,
Our guard is so
Yeah.
much up right now when it comes to anything, audio, video, images, right? What do you mean the Pope doesn't wear puffy jackets? Like we're
but
so
wouldn't it be
suspicious of
cool if he
everything.
did?
It would be.
Yeah.
It would be. But
Well, yeah,
that,
you have to be suspicious of anything, any image or anything that was created prior to January of 2023.
Yeah.
Right. Or I think somebody said 2022 was when the first images, OpenAI or
Yeah,
one of those
everybody
first kind of
started
public.
using
So,
Lensa.
yeah,
Whenever
yeah,
it was
exactly.
that
Yeah.
everyone was like, "Oh, look at this. Let's make
Yeah.
Lensa profile pictures." That was it.
So
But now we've gone one step further, and I'm being fed ads where you can buy an extra finger to slip on your hand so that it looks
Right.
like your image is AI generated.
Right.
So you can cheat on your spouse with your extra finger, and there's a picture of it, and you never know.
it's I don't know. I think that's going to be, in some senses, I think maybe it's a good thing that we're in an election year, though, because it is going to force action, right? And
Yeah.
this is not new, right? We ran into some of these problems in the last election already, maybe not in the same capacity because, ChatGPT didn't exist or Midjourney wasn't
Right.
there or whatever, but there were already issues like that happening. It's only going to get exponentially worse for this election. And so maybe that is a saving grace, if you will, that it's forcing lawmakers to get serious about trying to figure some of this stuff out. And I know, like, for me, I'm just grateful that there's people like you, organizations like NAVA, that are speaking on our behalf, because most of the industry is too busy running around with pitchforks and just being pissed off about everything. And that's just not productive, right? Like, we need to be a part of the conversation if we're going to shape how this ultimately plays out.
And that right there is really the basis of why we felt that an AI prohibition wasn't the best course of action when we started, because it's going to happen. The union doesn't, none of us, Actra or SAG After or any of the unions, Les Voix in France, you said none of these unions have the power to completely keep AI out of the industry.
Yep.
Right. Whether they like it, whether they think they do or not. The tech companies who are building these things are not used to working with artists. They're they move fast and break things.
Yep.
And then they tell everybody to adapt or die.
Yep.
And so, well, we're not going to die. We're not going to adapt. So it's time for them to adapt or die. And this is what we're seeing. We're seeing, the consumers are pushing back. People are saying, don't feed me something that's AI generated, because I know that that you basically got it for pennies, yet you're going to charge me the same amount. Don't give me this crap that is terrible. Why would I want to play a video game that you obviously didn't hire human voice actors for and use really terrible generative AI that makes my experience as a consumer and a player terrible? Why would I want to listen to something? Or, on the flip side, some of the technology, some of the AI stuff that is good is really good.
Really good.
And is not discernible. You're not able to tell that it is AI generated. And so now we come into laws and legislation and regulations around labeling and transparency, that we as a consumer should have the right to know if something is AI generated.
That brings up a really great point, Carin. Why don't you talk about what you did at Mavo that scared the crap out of the entire room?
Oh, sure.
Your demonstration. I mean, you touched on it earlier when you said about, my voice is my password. Whatever. Great. Now I just said it. Now I'm dinged too. But
you're doomed.
Yeah, I'm doomed.
You're doomed.
But talk about that presentation, because I think that was very eye-opening for a lot of people that were at that conference and saw you do that.
Yeah, so we gave a presentation on AI, and as part of the presentation, I asked for a volunteer from the audience to come up and just tell us what they had for breakfast. So a woman named Pat came up, and I said, "Are you okay with me making a synthetic version of your voice? I promised to delete it after this." And she said, "Sure." And she told us, literally, it was about 20 seconds, what she had for breakfast, a little bit about herself, and then we stopped it. And then while Tim did the presentation, I generated a synthetic version of her voice, and we played it for the audience. And it took it took a little longer than 2 minutes because I was having trouble with the internet. But if the internet had been perfect, it would have taken me about 2 minutes to generate. And one of the things we said was, my voice is my password. You now have access to all of my bank accounts. And it sounded just like her.
Yeah, you couldn't tell the difference.
Yep. So that's what we're dealing with. When we were in DC, we were just walking down the street with someone from the office that is helping to connect us to all these senators and Congress people. And I said, hey, Justin, do you want me to make a synthetic version of your voice real quick? And he said, sure. And he was just having a conversation with Tim. I turned on my voice memos on my phone, recorded him walking down the street. He didn't have to say anything specific. And I generated a synthetic voice for him. And then we said something funny about his office, and he sent it around to all his bosses. And it took a few minutes for them to go through and tell everyone in the office that it wasn't real.
I can't decide if I am fascinated by this technology or if I am literally scared to death of it.
It's both fascinating and frightening. And here's the thing, like, it's wonderful to include the NAVA AI synthetic voice writer with all of your contracts, because you only need 3 seconds of source material to create a believable synthetic version of someone's voice. So if you're like, oh, well, I just did a 15-second commercial for them, so that's not going to be enough to make a synthetic voice. It is absolutely enough. Yeah. Even just like if you have a long name slate, that's enough. Even just your outgoing voicemail is enough. But the thing is, for years, we've been sending our files without any kind of AI writer. And so that means that every client you've ever worked with throughout your entire career, if you didn't include an AI contract writer, they have those files. If you gave them rights to those files in perpetuity, to do with whatever they want, legally, they may or may not have the right to create a synthetic version of your voice and never tell you about it.
That's crazy. So
you could retroactively go back to every single client you've ever worked with and ask them not to do that. But is that a good business practice? I don't know. Is that going to hurt you more than it helps you?
Then you just gave them the idea. The ones that didn't think of it before, all of a sudden you give them the idea.
I could do that.
Yep.
So, and then also, if someone really wants to create a synthetic version of your voice, they can just go onto your Facebook or your Instagram and find a recording of you, or find an interview of you on someone else's podcast, like this podcast. And they can just make
I already accepted the fact that I'm screwed between the podcast and YouTube streams and stuff. I'm like, I'm screwed. There's nothing I can do at this point. But
and that's why we need laws, because the AI contract writer is great, but it doesn't protect you in every single instance.
Got to be backed up by legislation. That's a different.
There has to be a law that says we own the sound of our own voices. We own our image. You can't take a picture of me and use it for whatever ad you want and make money off of me without my permission. We need to own the right to our likeness, image, and voice.
The optimistic Canadian in me wants to think that it's the shiny new object, right? And so right now, because it's so new, everybody's playing around with it. Not just clients. Like there was a story a month or two ago from a radio station somewhere in Europe. I can't remember, Switzerland or something. And they literally ran their whole radio station completely AI for 24 hours as a publicity stunt or something like that, right? So there's this whole shiny new object thing that's going on. And I have had a few clients who have told me that they've tried it, but that ultimately they just hated it, and it wasn't good enough, or they didn't like it, or the end user pushed back on it or whatever. And so there's a part of me that wants to believe that that's the story, where everybody's trying it to play with it because it's new and they want to see what it's going to be like, but ultimately the experience isn't good enough. And I know even that argument isn't going to hold because the technology is going to continue to improve. It goes back to what you said, Tim, though, about people are starting to recognize and question, why are you feeding me this stuff? I wish that there was a little more hope in that, but I said, that's maybe the delusional optimistic Canadian in me.
It's true, but we are also already, even before AI, living in a world of hyper-personalization.
Yep.
You get onto your Facebook feed, and right now I've been running a lot and posting about running, and I'm going to run a half marathon on Sunday. And so I get just leggings, just like athletic leggings in my feed all day long. As many leggings as you can imagine are in my Facebook feed. That's hyper-personalization.
Yep.
When we talk about AI can make things hyper-personalized in a way that we've never seen before.
Yep.
and that people may or may not want. And that includes television shows, that includes video games, that includes ads, that includes going up to a vending machine and it's saying like, "Hi, Carin, so happy you're here today. Would you like a Sprite like last time? Or do you want to try something new? How about a cherry Coke?" Right? Like they're going to do that. Your child will be watching a preschool show on Disney Plus and Mickey Mouse will say to them, "Hi, Alana." Like, is it the blue bird or the red bird or whatever, that will happen because hyper-personalization is a very big part of the entire landscape right now. And
remember those
AI
choose your own
can do that,
adventure
and
books
we
from when you
can't.
were a kid?
Exactly. But AI can do that. My synthetic voice can say every single person's name that exists in the world correctly with the right accent in the right language. Carin Gilfry, human, cannot do that.
Yep. It's valid. And see, I think that's the other side of the coin, right? There's a lot of doom and gloom. The other side of the coin is if we can get the right regulations, legislation in place, then for the enterprising voice actor, we monetize this and make it a tool that we use to our advantage and in our business. And I don't think most people are thinking that way yet because we're still living in the fear of it all. But that feels like the next progression to me is, okay, look, this is not going away, right? We're not going to stop it. So how do we embrace it and how do we benefit, monetize it, whatever? I think that's the next question, right?
Yeah. And that becomes, you look at, look at licensing terms, you look at various other things that you could do. You look at, the idea that yes, you can license it, but let's prioritize human artists before we license something else, or let's explore all of the impossible jobs that the human can't do. Like, Carin mentioned of, human Carin can't pronounce everybody's name or say the weather report in every location on Earth at any given time. That's an impossible job, but you can license and authorize. And what the fear is and what the concern is that we don't have control of where our voice is being used. So it could be out there saying everybody's name. It could be out there welcoming you to, to order a Sprite or a Coke. It could be, as we've seen in the UK, you could be the voice of, somebody who worked at IBM 25 years ago. They are now the voice of Wimbledon. Because because IBM licensed their voice to Wimbledon to use for all the announcements. They're not getting paid for any of that stuff.
Wow. Yeah.
And this is where the lack of control, that something they signed 25 years ago is being used against them now to authorize the use of their voice. So exactly what Carin said earlier, all these auditions that we've done on online casting sites for 20 years. Does somebody, how many of those auditions that go out that you see have 500 people have submitted and nobody was cast for it? They've got those 500 files. Now, against the terms of service, they can't use those for anything according to the terms of service, but who's tracking that?
I was going to say, who's policing that?
Terms of service can be changed at any time.
Voice 123 is not out there tracking where all of those auditions are landing or what all of those auditions are being used for, right?
Nor can they. Like, I mean, unless you build such a and that it's just not possible. The same thing, we send them to our agents all the time. We don't know what happens when the agent sent it out to the casting director or the casting director sent it to somebody else. We have this, we know that there is this unspoken contract or something in there that says it's not going to be used for something outside of the terms of this audition. But that's just hoping, that's assuming people do the right thing. And if somebody doesn't do the right thing, or, somebody, you're recording audiobooks in the public domain thinking it's going to be only used to play audiobooks for the blind or to put public domain books, and then all of a sudden you find that audio is now the data set or the foundation of Google or whatever it might be. Right? Legally that is there, but is it ethically? Is it the right thing to do? And this is now where I guess the eternal discussion of ethics and legality, which bump up against each other all the time. Because something is legal to doesn't mean it's right, and the right things aren't always necessarily protected by law. So
we also, to me and to us here at NAVA, there is a distinct difference between giving someone a file, a sound recording, a performance as its own entity, and taking the voice print from that file and then propagating it anywhere you want. Like, to me, there's a big difference when I say, I give you this file in perpetuity to do with whatever you want with this file. You can cut it up, you can put it into whatever. But when you are using that file to train a synthetic voice model and create a synthetic version of my voice print, that is a difference to me. Because then that is no longer, you're taking the work product and doing whatever you want with it. You're like changing the work product to take my biometric data and using my biometric data however you want. Those are separate things in my mind.
Totally different. Yeah. No, that's where legislation comes in to make those distinctions, right? Because it's probably the distinctions that not everybody's thinking about. Well, we touched on this a little bit ago, but let's get into it a little deeper, the Replica Studios deal, because this is like, it's the hot topic right now that everybody is talking about. So the first or one of the first agreements with an AI studio, is that going to set a precedent going forward for future deals? And I guess same question as the SAG deal, like how does this impact voice actors going forward?
This is a good question. We had a 2-hour AMA last night with Zeke Alton about this very specific thing.
And we will link to that. Is that somewhere online? Can I link to that in the show notes?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Perfect.
I have to. I will have it up because I have the video, so I have to edit the video together and get it up on our YouTube page. Amongst all the other things that we do here, we're also our own production studio, and Carin and I handle all the graphics and all of the video work,
all the graphics, all the video,
and everything we
all
do.
All the interviews.
So
you write articles.
This is multi-layered. The big issue with the Replica agreement was the rollout and the messaging that SAG Aftra presented to the community. Originally which caused 90% of the problems and the concerns that people have with this deal right now. The contract itself is the first of its kind. It is one of the first that has publicly been released. But regardless of, I'm going to take a step back and take a kind of a broad view of this, that the AI industry is fully unregulated completely. Nobody is held accountable by any third party to how they use the data. This is a company, an AI company, who said we will be held accountable by the union.
Right.
We will be held accountable to the members of the union. We will legally be held accountable to this contract. So if you don't like the contract, there's something you can do about it. If you don't like this agreement, the union members can be heard. They can make their voices heard and get this contract changed. The agreement is only for a year.
Okay.
At the end of this year, if we don't like it or nobody's using it, you don't have to work under this contract. You get this contract as Replica AI and you say, you know what? I'm not going to work for that company, and people don't work for that company. If we don't like the payment structure or how it comes out, then there's something you can do about it. The messaging was the problem in that it wasn't voted on by the membership, and legally a single employer contract like this, which is between just the union and just Replica, doesn't have to be voted on by the membership. That's one of the things that is confusing. There are 600 contracts, and if every single one of those contracts was to go to a national board and then go to a vote for 160,000 people to vote on, nothing would ever get done.
It'd be like working in government.
Yeah, exactly. So on audiobooks, and audiobooks are not. So there's a difference between collectively bargained, where you would collectively bargain with the audiobook, all the audiobook publishers at once. That would be voted on by the membership. These individual contracts,
like the AMPTP,
like the AMP,
with the TV theatrical contract. But audiobooks doesn't work that way. Explain, Tim.
Yeah. So audiobooks, the union has a specific contract with each audiobook publisher. Those terms are specific to that publisher. The committee that was voted in and volunteers their time in the union came to that agreement with the company. That committee voted on that and approved this contract with this audiobook company. That is the way that the union works. That's the way that the contracts work for these single employer contracts. That's what Replica is a single employer contract with Replica. It doesn't open up. It's not giving Replica access to all the voices and making voice actors work in AI. What it's doing is now you have an AI company that is a signatory to the union and is now being held accountable by the union and their lawyers and the membership to do the right thing and uphold this contract. That, in whatever capacity we want to talk about, whether you agree with the terms of the contract, that right there is groundbreaking. No other AI company in any capacity is being held accountable to anybody else.
I want to add too that they're just in the same way that SAG Aftra has multiple deals with multiple publishers, there will be more deals with more AI companies. So this is the first one, but there will be more coming. And the more AI companies that sign on to, this idea that they're going to work with union actors and have a union contract, that is a good thing for all of us. So the more deals SAG Aftra makes with more AI companies, the better.
And then, as Duncan, who is the national executive director, and other members of the negotiating teams have said, this is all great, but what we really need is legislation. We need laws. We need federal legislation, because there needs to be something in place. So this is a specific contract with Replica. It does nothing for any other company that's out there. So
I've been following along with the Replica situation on X primarily, and following along as an outsider, so to speak, Canadian non-union, but still paying attention to what's going on. And as near as I could tell, everybody was just ticked off about the whole entire deal. There was not a lot of positive comments going on, but it sounds like maybe it's because something was getting lost in translation. It sounds like there's maybe a communications issue, or is it a messaging issue?
A messaging problem. Yeah. So one of the things, SAG Aftra is wonderful and awesome, and we appreciate them so much. But one thing I think that SAG Aftra forgets sometimes is that people who are not union members don't understand all the intricacies of the way the union works. And even within the membership, it's very, very complicated. Like Zeke said, there are over 600 SAG Aftra contracts that exist. A lot of people thought when actors were striking the TV theatrical contract that all acting was struck. If you were a union actor, you were not allowed to act at all. That wasn't true at all. You just weren't allowed to act in specific TV and films that were under that contract. You could still do commercials. You could still do video games. You could still do explainers. You could still do audiobooks. People could still act, just not under that contract, because that is the contract that was being struck. It's the same thing with this. I think there is a certain assumption that people understand the way that SAG Aftra works. And so you come out with a message, SAG Aftra has made a deal with an AI company, and everyone thinks, oh my God, every single actor is going to be affected by the one deal with this AI company. And now SAG Aftra, and it's secret. They did it in secret. They made a deal secretly and we didn't vote on it. And that's just not how it works. Everything went exactly as it was supposed to. It's just there's a lack of understanding about how it's supposed to go.
And this this goes to something that Zeke said last night is and one of the reasons why NAVA exists in the capacity that we exist in is that the voiceover industry is very, very specific in how we operate. And as much as we are actors, this is completely different than how the on-camera world works, and how you communicate with the membership who are voice actors has to be different than how you communicate with those who are on camera. And we are in a new generation of people who as this is not anything new, who don't trust the union, who are not willing to completely say, okay, I believe the union has my best interests at heart when they did this contract. 20 years ago, 15 years ago, you still had that sentiment. You have some people, there's definitely, and I see this in many discussions, there's a generational gap. And it's not age, it's those who have either been in the union, who joined the union 10 years ago, or joined the union within the last 10 years. And those who joined the union more than 10 years ago have a much bigger trust and believe the union is supporting them than those who don't, who joined within the last 10 years or the last 5 years or the last few years, who don't believe that the union has the voice actors' interests at heart, because they don't think that the union understands how we actually operate. And so understanding that this messaging, and looking at, talking about, about being on Twitter, I'm going to call it Twitter because I don't believe in X, but if you were just to have followed just the consumer sentiment that was happening on Twitter or online over the weekend before they announced the replica agreement, you would have changed your messaging. You would have seen that the Wacom and Dungeons and Dragons Wizards of the Coast debacle was happening over the weekend, where people were furious about companies who they thought supported artists were using AI against artists. And so you had Wizards of the Coast as number one, you have Wacom as number two, and all of a sudden you have SAG After as number three. They get lumped into that. So you have to be aware of what the sentiment is in the community and what people are doing, what people are saying. This is where I go back to, I have this unfound faith in consumers, that the consumers are going to really lead or have a larger impact on the implementation and adoption of synthetic and AI generated content than I think probably legislation or laws will.
You said too, Marc, that you're an outsider. You don't live in the U.S. and you're not a member of SAG Aftra. And yes, while that may be true, I would say that this contract is good for all of us, even people who don't live in the U.S. and are not part of the union. Number one, because any actor can work under a union contract. And if you have the opportunity to work under a union contract, you absolutely should, because there are protections there for you that wouldn't exist otherwise. Number two, this deal is not bad. And having a company agree to abide by union rules and regulations is a really good thing. And the fact that this was the first contract to come out, there are things that we all wish were in there that are not in there. But the first thing that is released sets the precedent for the entire world. So now everyone, and this contract is public, so now everyone can see you get a 4-hour session and it's this fee. You get a 6-hour session and it's this fee to generate the voice. That is now a precedent. So any company that comes to you and says, we want to create a synthetic version of your voice, we're not going to pay you at all. You can say, you know what, actually, I know that there is a contract that exists that says that we're going to pay you this much for 4 hours and this much for 6 hours. If you have a company that says to you, I want you to pay me to create a synthetic version of your voice, the actor should pay the company to create a synthetic version of your voice, you can come back and say, actually, no, my voice is valuable. And there is a contract that exists that says I get paid this much for 4 hours and this much for 6 hours to create my voice. So it arms all of us with a little bit more than we had before this contract came out, even if you're not in the union.
100%. And I think that's why conversations like this are so important, because the vast majority of voice actors, I think it's fair to say, are non-union talent. And so I think there are a lot of them who probably aren't paying attention to what's going on right now, but ultimately the conversations that happen, the influence that is put into the contracts or legislation or whatever comes as a result of this, it matters, union or not.
Yeah.
It's going to set the tone, and it's going to give even the non-union voice actors something that they can refer back to and have in their corner. And so I do think these conversations are so important to have. So let me ask you, what do the voiceover talent do right now? NAVA is obviously deeply ingrained in all of this. You're having conversations with the union. You're having conversations with various and assorted levels of government. What can the voice actor do to be a part of this in a productive way?
Be educated and know what it is. Know how to read these contracts in a way that actually answers the questions you need to know in order to do that job. I mean, we have an AI synthetic page on the website, which has the AI writer on there. It has definitions about the work. We have a 13 questions to ask page that Melissa Medina put together for us, that these are the questions you need to ask when interacting with any AI or synthetic voice company. If you can't get these questions answered, you can't make an educated decision about whether you want to work with that company. And that goes both ways. You can't say yes to a company if you don't know all of the parameters or what the ramifications of that contract is. And additionally, you can't say no if you don't know what it means to say no. You could potentially, a $30,000 job, just looking at the price of that job doesn't tell you whether it's worth doing. It could be worth doing, and $30,000 for a very controlled, very specific usage and recording process and storage and safety and generation of a voice could be very viable. $30,000 for unlimited usage and unlimited generation in perpetuity is not worth anything, and you should walk away from that. But if you don't have that answer, you can't say yes or no. This is something that, we've worked with, online casting, specifically Voice 123, to implement those questions into their platform. And if anybody, if you were paying attention on the site a few months ago, there was probably a month or so where there were hundreds of AI TTS jobs showing up every single day. And people, the gut reaction was to say no and turn those down. That's what people were doing, and they were pushing back. But we could look at that. We didn't even have the right questions to ask about whether we could take that or not. So we worked with Voice 123. They implemented our questionnaire into their system, and the next day there were no jobs. And right now, one job pops up every few weeks, because that's those jobs. That's the only job that is able to actually answer the questions and provide enough information in order to even be up on the casting site. So that's an important thing to look at. Be educated.
I think there are two things voice actors can do. One is to, besides what Tim said, in addition to, yes, and one is to amplify the message of consent, control, and compensation. Those are the three things we all want when it comes to digital and synthetic voices. We want consent. We want to be able to say yes or no to whether or not you can create a synthetic version of my voice. We want control, meaning I get to decide what my voice does. And compensation, I need to be paid fairly for the use of my digital double or digital voice clone. And then the other thing is, we need to also educate our clients.
Yes.
You can do that by including a synthetic voice contract writer. It doesn't even have to be the NAVA synthetic voice contract writer. You can educate your clients by including a synthetic voice contract writer with every job that you do, to open up the conversation and to let them know voice actors are not really okay with you cloning their voices without their permission. Sign this writer so that you know. You can educate your clients by, like, you're in a Source Connect test and they're like, okay, just say anything. And you're like, okay, oh man, have you thought about AI lately? It's so crazy. I have this. Have you seen any of those contract writers come? Like, just have conversations with your clients about it. Don't be afraid to have conversations, because they're thinking about it too. And if they're not, they should be. And it's an interesting topic.
It is an interesting, and to add to that, is something that Carin said yesterday, I think in our AMA, is talk about rates. Be open with this. This company. You're going to go work with this company, and you find out that somebody, they're offering you $5,000, but because somebody else a week ago worked for that same company, they got paid $10,000. Then say, hey, find out why. Because the company, this employers want to hide what they pay people, so that people can't talk and negotiate better rates themselves, and they can keep things secret and have that control. That's illegal to do. At least in the U.S., you have a right to discuss what your pay is. But there's nothing, the taboo about discussing how much you get paid. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's an education for everybody to understand what that is. And you can look at that and say, great, the value of this job, and this is something I talk about a lot, is don't put the value on you of, well, I'm only worth this amount of money for the job. Put the value on the job. So this is a commercial going to be used in, which I think, Marc, and you talk about, which is, I think, one of the things you talk about for a while, is this is a commercial being used in this area for this length. That's how much this job costs. Whether I'm going to be the voice of that, or Carin's going to be the voice, or Marc, you're going to be the voice. This is the value of this job. And now I think maybe I'm worth more than that. So I'm going to ask for an additional. But this is, with the union, you have minimums. And it's not the minimum of, I think this is Tim's minimum, and this is Carin. This is the minimum of this job. This is the value of that work. And put that value on the job. And so I always say, a lot of times people say, how much are you going to charge? I say, well, the market rate for this job is this. Here's the market rate for that job. I didn't set that. This is what the market set. I'm not putting a value on myself or my performance in this. Talk about those rates. Talk about that. Be open about that, because compensation is something that everybody's struggling with, because we don't know what the value of this compensation is. A lot of times the compensation we expect as voice actors is directly in opposition to the business model of these AI companies, because they don't operate in a way that allows them to pay us what we're worth. Well, you can't.
And they
work
don't
with that company.
understand how we're paid either.
Exactly. Yes.
They're like, oh, it's only going to take you 5 minutes to record a 15-second commercial. So how's $50?
Yeah,
You're like, no.
Let's just be honest. That's not just AI companies that haven't figured that side of things out.
No. It's all companies.
Yeah.
All right. So one final question. What can the voiceover community do to support NAVA? Because obviously you guys have become, whether you meant it or not, you've become the leader, the champion, right? You guys are Mel Gibson sitting up on the horse.
I don't know if I want to be Mel Gibson in particular, but
you get the reference. So what can the community do to support you so you can keep doing all of the amazing things that you're doing?
I mean, Carin talked about this a lot. I'll pick up. I'll take what Carin's going to say, and then she can make up something new, so I don't have to say. Is join NAVA. Be a member. When we walk into meetings with senators, if we can say, we're here to represent 2,000 working voice actors, or we're here to represent 10,000, or the more people we are able to represent, the more sway that we have, the more legitimacy that we have. And also, we are a fully funded operation. So the more members we have, the more ability we have to be out there doing these things and getting ourselves to these conventions and getting ourselves to Washington, D.C. and getting ourselves to these meetings, potentially getting ourselves over to Europe to be a part of the discussion that's happening in the EU when those opportunities arise. That's really the best thing that we can do. And that was Carin's pitch. So I'll let you make up something.
I would love it if all of you attended our donation-based classes. We have a lot of really cool donation-based classes. Our instructors usually give their time, and so all of the proceeds from those classes go to help us with our operating costs and to help us fund scholarships and to help us pay for legal aid for voice actors and things that we need. And what's great about a donation-based class is that you actually get something in return. If you want to make donations to NAVA, you absolutely can. We are a 501c3 recognized by the IRS, so that's possible. You can donate and get a charitable donation tax deduction. But what's great about a donation-based class is that you're not just giving money into the void, you're actually getting something in return. We have one coming up on January 25th. If you're a NAVA member, you get one free class per month. But if you're not a member, you can still take advantage of all of our donation-based classes. And those are a great way to get involved and learn and help our cause while you're doing it.
So give us the rundown. Website, social medias, where can we find you guys? Where can we get connected? Where can we get all this information? Because I know that's the other thing, right? Is you guys are sharing a ton of information publicly as well.
We're doing our best.
Yes, we are. NAVAvoices.org, and then social media, where everything NAVA Voices on all social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Currently, that's where we are. LinkedIn as well, but everything is NAVA Voices on there. So.
Well, Tim, Carin, thank you so much for not just answering these questions today. But like I said, I don't know if it's what you envisioned when you started NAVA. I think it probably has evolved a little bit from what you thought you were originally going to do. But I'm grateful that you followed that evolution and become a voice. There's been organizations and associations and whatnot in the past, and they've had ideas of doing stuff like this, but I don't know that anybody has ever executed on it. And you guys are genuinely executing on it. And as a community, we're grateful.
Cool.
We do it with love and drive and hope. So let's keep the hope going strong.
Yep, absolutely.